today we're going to be talking about kind of tracking progress using data and reports and that type of stuff. And the only reason I like to say always go back to your coalition leadership is because every coalition is different. And I always start out my coalition member 101 saying this because it's really important, because how I might be describing some things today might be different from how your coalition uses this data or collects this data. So we're just going to kind of go over some general information, but always refer back to your coalition leadership and how your organization functions. So with that being said, if those of you that are on the call today don't know, if you're a coalition member and you are not sure who we are, who Epiphany Community Services is, we are actually an evaluation and technical assistance firm. We do work with a lot of different coalitions, organizations, on a variety of different issues, topics, things like that. And we would be not doing our job if one of our episodes in this series was not talking about data, tracking data, and really the reporting and evaluation part of coalition work. So that is kind of where this topic is coming from today. Again, it's going to be very overarching, so don't feel like, you know, hey, I still don't completely understand it, because you might not. That's where we want you to then go back to your coalition leadership, you know, other members, talk with them about it to really improve your skills on your own coalition side of everything. So with that being said, let's go ahead and look at today's agenda. We are going to be looking at why data is important, and then we're going to get into tracking actual coalition work. If you see here, we do say Reach Collaboration. That is because that is the data software that we use, that most of our clients use. We recommend using for tracking, you know, coalition organization work. And then we kind of get into some of the different areas within that data system, the accomplishment outputs, the organizational improvements. And these are kind of just generalized terms. They are in this Reach system, but I think they're really important in terms of learning how to track and report data. So that's going to be kind of why we're going to talk about those today as well. And then lastly, we're going to dip our toes really briefly into understanding and using coalition reports, data reports, things like that, different types of reports your coalition probably uses, has, things like that, because I think it's really important for a coalition member to at least understand the basics of looking at a report and what it says and why it's important to the coalition and the work you're doing. So we wanted to make sure to kind of touch on that today as well. As always, if you guys have any questions as we go throughout, please feel free to pop them in the chat. I'll try to take some pauses here or there to let you guys ask any if need be. So with that, let's go ahead and get into our first topic today. So why is data important? A lot of times people can come up with an answer for this, and that's great. But in terms of coalition work, we really need to think through, how are we planning to use our data? Why do we need it? And that really comes from, why is it important? So with that, data is really in everything that we do. It is involved in our everyday lives, whether you realize it or not. So for instance, let's talk about maybe a non-coalition example. When you go to the doctors, a lot of times when you're sick or something, the first thing that usually happens is a nurse asks you, what are your symptoms? That right off the bat is them gathering qualitative data on your symptoms to determine your prognosis, right? And how to treat it. That's really what we do in coalition work. It's the same kind of thing, determining the issue, the problems, what needs to happen, and then trying to get that right dose so we can improve our community. That's really one of the big things I wanted to talk about before we get too far into why data is important. I want you guys to understand that first. Another example, an everyday example of data collection in our lives. Even if you're just having a general conversation, let's say with a friend, a lot of times you're gathering qualitative data about them, their lives. Maybe they made a recent change. Maybe they decided to go vegan or something. They're telling you about it. They're suggesting it to you, or vice versa. You're still gathering data on them, their lives. You're storing it in your memory. That way, when it comes to future, interactions with them, you know how to act, adjust, make changes to your communication that you have with them. So really, when you think about it, data is in everything we do. So with that, I want you to think of this kind of as our definition today. It's kind of overarching, broad, but I want you to think of data as being helpful in establishing benchmarks and determining progress towards our established goals. That's really the narrow kind of focus of our data and why it's so important. Depending on your organization, you guys might have one or two big goals. And to get to those goals, you might have, 5, 2, 10 different benchmarks in there that you want to meet. Whether that is, you're trying to reduce underage drinking. So you say, right now, 30% of youth are reporting past 30-day use of underage drinking. We want to get that down to 25% in 2 years, or whatever it may be. Getting that data is really important because it's going to help you guys tell your story, going to help you show progress towards those stated goals that you guys have. When we think of data as well, I just wanted to bring this up because I think it's a huge part of data collection, why it's important, and that is going to be the types of data. So really, I want you to think of it as qualitative and quantitative. So not to get too far into data collection today, but basically qualitative is kind of like, I like to say my word data. So if I'm going to go and talk to someone and ask them how their day was, or for instance, the doctor who asked you for your symptoms, that's collecting qualitative data. It's how they feel, what they're saying to you. It can be biased sometimes, but it's still relevant data in terms of the work that we're going to be doing. Whereas the quantitative data side is more of your numbers. It's straight percentages, numbers, whether that be from, a survey, like your 30% of underage drinking in the past 30 days. Different things like that where they have an actual numerical value becomes your quantitative data. Like I said, we're not going to get too much into that today because that can be a whole training wormhole in itself. So if that's something that you're interested in, seeing the type of data like that and how your coalition collects it, how you can help in that, feel free to reach out to your coalition leadership or other members to see what that process has been like in the past. With that, I then want to get into really our next kind of area of focus today, which is tracking coalition work. So now that we know why data is important, why we gather it, let's get into how we can actually track this and look at it in an easier way, or kind of like break it down so we can make the adjustments needed and understand what we're looking at. Because let's be honest, if we can't understand or read our data, what good is it to our organization, to our goals, to our progress, to our funders, if we can't understand it and we can't talk educated, we can't talk as if we're educated about it. So that's going to be kind of our focus of this next area. Let me know if you guys get confused because it can be a little kind of combined at times, not combined, but overlapping, I guess you'd say at times. So I want to make sure we're clear in how we're tracking data. Like I said, most of our clients do use Reach collaboration, Reach software, to track any and all data. And with that, I like to think of it kind of in 4 separate kind of quadrants, I guess you would say. So that's going to be how we're going to first break it down. The first one we have is external. I want you to think of external as our dose. So if this is the doctor's office example, once they gather your qualitative data from your symptoms, they usually prescribe you a prescription, right? A dosage to help you get better. That is what our external outputs are. Think of that as the things that you're doing in your community to improve it, to accomplish your goals, to enact change, right? They're external. Next, we have internal outputs. So here I want you to think of this as kind of like the paperwork being done behind the scenes at the doctor's office, everything that needs to be filled out for, the doctor to be able to sign your papers, for you to be able to have a, a work note, everything like that. It's kind of happening behind the scenes, right? In terms of coalition work, that's our behind the scenes coalition work. So that's, your coalition implementing changes within the organization to better serve your community we'll kind of get into that more later on if that's still kind of confusing. The next one we have is data collection. Data collection, this is where we're looking at that quantitative and qualitative data piece. So this is where we're more gathering data from focus groups, a listening session. Maybe it's getting data from the local police department or the health department. Whether it's that word data or that number data, we want to make sure that we're adding that, collecting it, and tracking it. The next one we have is external factors. So this is kind of our last quadrant we have. External factors are going to be something that a lot of organizations come across. It's not something that's new. Honestly, we face it in our everyday lives. There are so many external factors in our lives that it would probably take you forever, a lifetime to list them, right? It could be a hurricane, it could be a natural disaster like that, it could be a large drug bust in your area. Whatever it may be, these are things that we really have no control over, right? We can control our external outputs. We can provide a service or not provide a service. Can we control if COVID-19 is going to impact our work? To an extent, yes, but honestly, we can't just snap our fingers and COVID-19's gone, right? As much as we probably wish we could do that. It's an external factor because we unfortunately do not have the ability to control that. So when you're thinking of external factors, it's an important step when looking at tracking data, because we want to be able to say, well, we provided this dose and, we did these internal outputs to help increase our ability to provide that dose. We collected the right data that we needed. However, at the same time, we had this external factor affect this work. So it's really kind of a whole math problem that comes together, and I'll show you guys that later on, to really get you guys to the point of understanding evaluation and being able to make educated improvements, updates to your coalition's work. So with that, I want to kind of get into this a step further. So like I said, Reach Collaboration takes those 4 quadrants and breaks it up into a little bit different terms, and that's going to be the ones you see here. So in terms of accomplishment and outputs, these are going to be the efforts that we are doing for the community. So those external outputs, whether we are providing a training for youth, maybe we're providing a after-school activity, maybe we provided a training on how to properly lock up your medications for adults. Whatever it is, we could be, implementing efforts towards a new policy. All that work we are doing externally in the community, we're doing it for the community, we're trying to improve our area. That is all external outputs. So that is going to be one of the pieces of our puzzle, right? The next one we're going to get into a little bit more is organizational improvements. So we kind of talked through these examples a little bit too. I want you to think of these as improving your own self, improving your own coalition to do the work it needs to do. Whether that be electing new coalition leadership, maybe it is going and attending a training yourself so you can, better equip yourself to do this work for the community. Whether it's receiving assistance on a specific technical area within the coalition's work. Maybe it's updating your goals. Maybe it's editing your mission so it's aligned with your work more. All of these different things go into your internal outputs that really then allow you guys to do your external outputs. So kind of think of it in that kind of way. The next one we have is key events. So in Reach, we call these key events, but really these are those external factors. These are those crazy things that happen in our environment, in our communities that we unfortunately have no control over. We can't snap our fingers and they disappear. We can't control them, right? Some different ones, I kind of wrote some down here as examples for you guys in terms of a coalition view. Those are going to be more of like your new state or local law being passed. As much as we can say, oh, well, I voted, I had an influence. Yes, you may have voted. You may have, advocated for a new policy. However, if you are not the person that's actively signing, that bill, that law being passed, whatever, you technically do not have any control over it, right? So it technically is an external factor if there's a new law that was passed, maybe repealed, whatever it may be. Other things that may happen in your community could be something like a large heroin bust, a large drug bust. Maybe there was a underage alcohol party that was busted. Different things like that where it's like going to have an impact on your work because that's your focus areas, but you have no control over it, right? You did not tell these people to set up a heroin operation right off the highway in your community. It just happened. And you guys are grateful that it got busted because now we know, we can adjust, we can talk about this issue, we can make the changes we need to in our community. However, it was something that we had no control over and may impact our work. So external factors can be kind of hard to see sometimes, and that's okay. A lot of our coalitions do struggle with identifying these, and it's completely normal because a lot of times they kind of happen in the background. If you're not plugged in the gossip networks, or maybe you didn't hear about it, you might not always know about some of these. Obviously, something like COVID-19 is one that's kind of like obvious in your face. It's something that's impacting all of us. However, if there was a large heroin bust, you might not have heard of that right away. You might actually have to go out, watch the news, check the news online, whatever it may be, to look for some of those other hidden key events that may have happened in your communities. Lastly, we have indicator data. So we call it indicator data, but basically it's any kind of data that you've collected via qualitative or quantitative. In REACH, quantitative is the most effective way to put it in. Qualitative data is a little bit trickier. However, we really want you to make sure that this is something that you're tracking, because we can't just have external factors, internal factors, and then have our key events, and everything else. We also have to have that data to back it up, right? We can't just say that we provided all these trainings to youth and that made them not drink in the past 30 days anymore. We can't just say that, right? We have to have data to back it up, pretty obvious. So we want to make sure that we're collecting it, whether it be a youth survey data, law enforcement data, health department data, or even like those focus groups and listening sessions. It's, like I said, sometimes can be biased, but it is really important information when it comes down to being able to write reports, share, and speak on your coalition's work that you've done. The last thing I wanted to show you guys kind of with this tracking coalition work is really the putting it all together piece, right? So I've mentioned this earlier, it's basically like an equation. I want you to think of your external outputs and your internal outputs as parts of the equation. So you got to add those two together. We also have to add in our data collection, right? That's a huge part. But then we also have to add in our external factors, which really have an overall impact on all three of our other areas, because it has an overall impact on all of the work we've done. Because, we could be doing all this work on getting our county to maybe pass a tobacco 21 policy. We've been working hard on it. Maybe it's been a year or 2 years in the making. We've been trying to get it happen. And then all of a sudden the state decides, oh, well, we're just going to go ahead and pass a state law that says tobacco is now 21 and older. That's great. I mean, it's a great outcome to have. It's a great external factor to have. But we also want to be able to show that the coalition hasn't done no work. We did do work towards this. We're trying to get this policy for tobacco 21 passed in our county. We were fortunate enough to get it passed statewide, so we kind of had a stopping point. You want to be able to show all those different areas within your work, because at the end of the day, that's how we get to evaluation. That's how we measure progress. That's how we are able to show funders, you guys are doing the work that they gave you the money for, right? If someone gives you money to work on tobacco prevention in your community, you better be able to show that you're working on that. And funders do take notice of that. If you are able to have good data to show your work, to show the steps you are taking along the way to get to that final end goal, that is great. Like always, your math teacher, when you were in elementary school, middle school, high school, whatever, they always ask you to show your work, right? They never want you to just put the answer on the plate or on the board or on your paper. It's always show your work. How did you get there? That's the biggest thing with coalition work, that it takes time, yes, but it's really rewarding at the end because it leads to, like I said, sustainability through more funding opportunities. It leads to better community buy-in, community involvement, because they can see what you guys are doing. They can see the impact you're having. So really being able to demonstrate that along the way is super impactful and really helpful in your coalition's overall success. With that, that was kind of the end of kind of tracking data. I want to get into this big piece just a little bit today. It is quite large, so we're going to get into understanding and using coalition reports. I want to briefly talk about the different reports that you might see, your coalition leadership might share with you, and that could be something like an evaluation report, so we're going to get into that one today a little bit more. That's going to be the one we're going to focus on. Progress reports. So a lot of times certain funders require you to submit progress reports. Maybe it's 2 times a year, maybe it's every quarter. Other things like a grant report, so kind of the same thing. Certain grantors ask you for reports during different times of the year. Progress report is along the lines of the same thing. As well as data collection or a survey report. So these are kind of the big 3, 4, I guess you would say, that a lot of times a coalition has. You might have other ones along the way depending on what your coalition's working on, doing, data that you're collecting, things like that. However, the big one I want to get into today and just briefly show you guys some snapshots in terms of a coalition member, you may have seen this. Typically, evaluation reports go out to clients at the end of the year, and then we also do a semi-annual. So this is actually pictures from one of our annual reports that we do. It is just kind of our tester, our sample, so the data is not fully filled in, but you can kind of get the picture. To a new coalition member, to even someone who's maybe been a coalition member for 2, 3 years, whatever it may be, this can be kind of overwhelming, right? And that's to be expected. You are a coalition member. You do not always have to be completely in the know on everything. However, knowing at least how to read this in an educated way will help you be a more successful member, will help you know why your coalition is making the changes it is, why your coalition's doing what it's doing, and really just be able to understand the data behind the purpose, right? And why we're doing what we're doing. So an evaluation report can feel quite overwhelming. Our reports tend to use REACH, so it tends to follow those same wording as we just talked through a second ago with the accomplishment outputs, the key events, the organizational improvements. It really pulls together all of those in both graphical form and word form for you guys to be able to read through and see where you're coming up short. Maybe you need to make some adjustments because it's working, but maybe not as fast as you had hoped. So maybe we need to do a little bit more here, a little less there. The report overall is really a tool for you guys to be able to look at and say, this is what we said we'd do. Are we getting there, right? Are we meeting those benchmarks that we originally set that we talked about? Because at the end of the day, if we're not, is there an issue? Do we need to make adjustments? Or is it just that we're maybe moving at a slower pace than we had hoped? Which is okay. That's why we look at those key events, those external factors, because something might have happened that is making us move a little slower. And we can say, okay, it's not something on our end, there's just a slowdown happening here because of this. Or, wow, we said that we were going to provide over 100 youth with this training by the end of the school year. We were only able to hit 50. Why is that? Is there something that we need to adjust? Was it because of COVID? Was there a reasoning behind it? And if so, can we fix it for next time? So really being able to read different reports can be super helpful in feeling comfortable as a coalition member because you know the reasoning behind what your coalition leadership is saying, why they're doing what they're doing, or why they're suggesting different things. And really being able to have that conversation with your leadership is really helpful for them, whether it's a coalition coordinator or director. They get bogged down, guys. I'm not going to lie to you. It's hard to lead a coalition when the members are not engaged, when they're not really fully there. Even if it's just something as simple as being able to sit down with your coordinator and say, hey, I saw this in the data. What do you think about it? And just having those conversations, opening the floor, it helps breed communication. It helps take some stuff off their plate because, like I said, they work crazy hours, they work hard, and they're great. And yes, it's their job. So a lot of people are like, well, it's their job. Yes, it is, but it's also great to have help and support from your community members, your coalition members who have a stake in this, whether it's your kids go to the school or, you grew up here your whole life and you like to see the community be successful. Really getting involved will help you become a more successful member, as well as getting that fulfillment, breeding that relationship with your leadership and your community to grow the work, to make your community a better place, right? Because that's what we're really all working for. We just want everyone to live happy, healthy lives and, make our communities a better place. So with that, I'm not going to get too much into any of those other reports today. There's tons of different reports in terms of survey data reports, so I really don't want to get into that. Again, wormhole today, qualitative data, quantitative data, all that stuff, mainly because it can depend on what kind of data your coalition collects. So I wanted to just give you the brief overview of a few things, make sure you guys knew these were something that you probably should know about as a coalition member. And if you did learn something new today, you're like, I've never heard of an evaluation report. Our coalition's been getting those. How come I've never seen them? Ask about it. I mean, get out there, educate yourself. It's always going to be more helpful for you, your coalition, and the success of your coalition and community if you do so. Lastly, just to kind of summarize everything today, data is important to be able to show progress, right? We all kind of were able to get that takeaway. After that, tracking all external outputs or coalition work is important. There is no detail that is too small when it comes to tracking data. And I'm completely real about that, guys. Even if it's something as small as 2 volunteers who provided 2 hours, that's time that the coalition has generated. That still means something. That adds up at the end of the day, at the end of the month, at the end of the year. We want to be able to show that. We want to be able to really give this overall picture. And we can't do that if we decide that certain pieces are too small and we kick them out. We have to track everything and anything when it comes into our coalition work, right? After that, we have always track internal outputs. Again, coalition work, internal coalition work and changes. So really, if there is a staff turnover, if you guys are having to attend trainings, if you guys are needing technical assistance on things, tracking that, because like I said, it is just part of the puzzle. It's a part of the picture that we need to show your coalition's work and really highlight the level of impact you're having. And then lastly, I think the most important one is that external factors. These help tell your story. As much as you think they might not, they're not as important, they're hard for me to track. Jessica, I can never find them, my coalition or my community never has any. That's another thing, my community never has any. Sometimes that is the case, but honestly, it might just mean you're not digging hard enough. I can tell you that there probably is stuff, even if it's small, there's still stuff that is gonna have an impact. There's still those factors out there that are gonna have an impact on your coalition and your work. And then lastly, get to know your coalition and its data through those reports. Like I said, if you're someone new and you just came into learning what a progress report was and didn't even know that was a thing, or an evaluation report, go back to your coalition leadership, go back to some of your other coalition members and say, hey, have you seen this? What is this? Can I look at it? Can I, talk to you about it? Different things like that. Help engage yourself, because the more engaged you are, the more at stake you have, and the better the work ends up being, because everyone wants to succeed. If you don't have any more questions for me, feel free to hop off and enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to meeting with you guys on the next webinar. Thank you.